Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of 2D Twin Stick Top Down Shooter. My name is Casanis. Guys, in the last episode, we took a look at player projectiles and setting up player combat. In this episode, we're going to take a look at the feedback we get from the combat that occurs between the player and the enemies. All right, let's get started. Giving your player feedback is not as simple as tossing something onto a UI and saying, there you go, there's your information. It's not that easy. The feedback you're giving your player, the information you're giving your player is how they're going to make all the decisions in your game. If you aren't giving the proper feedback, if you are not giving the right type of data, if you're not putting it in the right location for them to see, all these things will have an effect on your player's ability to make meaningful choices within your game. They will not have the information they need to be able to decide to do certain things within your game. Any action they take, they're going to do based on the information that you've given them. So there's a number of things that you have to do concerning your feedback, a number of decisions that you have to make as a developer about your feedback before you should even put anything on the screen. One of the very first decisions you need to make is what information your player has to have in order to be able to make meaningful choice within your game. You have to understand what information you're giving them and when they need it. So if you have to know your health and you have to know the enemy's health before you can decide to attack that enemy, if that's a really important part of your game, then demonstrating your health bar is important and the enemy's health bar is important. And possibly the enemy's damage might be important too. You might indicate how much damage an enemy does through various means, but maybe all that information is required in your game for your player to make meaningful choices. So the very first thing you have to do is decide on the information that is required immediately and the information that's required at other points in time. So the immediate information should be available to your player at a simple glance, and the information that's required, for deeper things to occur over time or whatever, can be hidden in menus, etc. So there's lots of different ways to make these things available, but it's what you're making available that's important. The next decision you have to make is where you're putting this information. And again, this is equally important. Information that is immediately available can be used to make immediate decisions. Information that is hidden and needs to be sorted through, then you'll have to look through that data and make decisions based on that afterwards. So if there's something that's immediately required in order for your player to be able to play or make decisions in your game, you have to put it somewhere on the screen. You have to make it available so they can immediately see it and make those decisions. So that's the next thing you have to do. You have to decide a couple of things. First of all, is your information diegetic or non-diegetic? Non-diegetic feedback or non-diegetic visuals or audio, all those things are not part of the actual game world. So they're not something that are embedded in the world. They don't actually have something that's creating them in the world. So as an example, music that you've overlaid on top of the game that doesn't actually have a source is non-diegetic music or audio. Something like a health bar, like I've got here, that's floating above my player's head, is a non-diegetic visual. It's not actually something that's created by the world. It has no source in the world, but it's information that I'm giving my player. On the other side of things are diegetic visuals or diegetic feedback or diegetic audio. This diegetic means that it has a source in the world itself. It comes from within the world. So as an example, if you have an astronaut floating through space and they look at their wrist computer and they see they have 10% oxygen left. Well, that wrist computer is a diegetic object. It lives in the world and it's giving you information diegetically, something that's been created within the world itself. We accept the fact that that computer's on the wrist and it's a source of our information. So these are things that you can do. There's lots of games that do this really well. We could have set up instead of having a health bar in this character, I could have set it up so that as the character becomes more and more hurt, their images change, so they're bloody and bandages, etc. Those would be diegetic visuals that would give my player feedback about their health. So this is another decision you have to make, diegetic versus non-diegetic. In this case here, I've gone the simple route, and well, it's not always simple, but I've gone this route here where I've created non-diegetic information for the most part that I'm giving you. Part of that non-diegetic and diegetic decision is where you place the information in your scene. So let's go with the idea of non-diegetics like it's got here. I could throw up a health bar anywhere I want in the scene, across the top of the screen, for example, in the center, so that I could see the health. And all I have to do is look from where I'm playing up to the top, and there's my information. I can see how much health I have. If this was a game where I had a number of rounds or weapon projectiles that I had a limited number and I had to track them, I'd have to put that information on the screen as well. So, deciding where you put things in your scene is of extreme importance. You want your players to have that information quickly. You don't want to obscure the player's view of your game. Sometimes having things that are hovering around the player are not the best way of doing things. You don't want too much geography devoted to your UI. If it's not important information, you want to reduce that so that there's more geography for play. There's a lot of decisions to make. It's oftentimes something that might take some trial and error, understanding exactly the information you have to give your player and where you should put it. I made a decision. In this case, I made a decision to have a health bar floating across my player's head. I'm going to do the same thing with objects in the world that you can destroy. There'll be a health bar that's floating above their head, and that health bar will change as the player moves around the world and takes damage. I've put it within the play space. My camera follows my player around, so I've got it's set up so that the health bar floating above their head is immediately visible without having to look away from the action that's occurring within the game. There's nothing wrong with having a health bar elsewhere where the player has to look over to get that information. That's perfectly acceptable as well. But I've decided to add that health bar on top of the player. Okay, so I'm going to hit play here, and let's take a look at what I've set up. Okay, so let me hit play. All right, so I've got myself a character here, and you can see at the top of the screen or at top of the character within my visual play area, I can see that player's health. And that's great. I don't have to track anything else. I don't need to track the number of spell points they have or anything like that within this game. All I have to track is their health, and that's for right now. Maybe later on that'll change, who knows. But for right now, that's what I've got. The way I've got this set up is my player has a green health bar, and that green health bar will shrink and slowly show red. And as that red shows, then the value that we're showing there, the actual numerical value of their health, will also change. So I'm giving my player a quick visual representation of their health with this sliding bar, this scaling bar. That scaling bar, they can glance at it quickly and understand approximately where they are in their health. However, if they need exact details, like I know that that thing over there does 10 damage and I'm going to die if I go on it, and I only have 10 hit points left, I have to know the exact amount of information, like exact amount of my health data. So I've got both this representation of health through the health bar as well as the value of health. That's not always required. This is going to be a decision you make as a developer whether or not you want that. Let me head over here and take a little bit of damage to show you something else. Boom. So there you go. I've taken some damage, and you can see that as I take damage, I get that number that pops up. That number that's popping up is giving me more information about the type of enemy over there and how much damage that enemy does. And again, that's something that's really important. If I've ran in there and it was an enemy that's going to, kill me right away if I go too close to it, I'm going to stay away. So I'm giving my player the information that they need in order to make these decisions. And I've done it in this particular way. There's no right way. Well, there is right ways and wrong ways. But I'm not going to be looking at whether something is right or wrong right now. I'm setting it up to demonstrate to you ways that you can actually create this damage. The last thing I set up on the player is on player death, then they receive now visual confirmation they're dead. All right, you're dead. Okay, so let's take a look at how I've done those things. Okay. So if we take a look at the player base here, I'm going to expand it, and we take a look at this extra thing I've added now called the player canvas. The player canvas is simply the object that you're seeing here. It is simply a UI. It's an in-world UI, a world space UI, as you can see here, to which I've added an image. And let's just open it up here so you can see. I've added a hurt image, which is a red image underneath, and I've added this healthy green image as well. This healthy green image has been set up as a filled image type, whereas the hurt image is a simple image type. The health here, the health bar here, is filled based on the value. See the fill amount here. And you can see I've set it up so that as I scrub this back and forth, at a value of 1, I'm 100% full. And as I scrub downwards towards 0, I am 100% dead. Okay, so what we're going to be doing in code is affecting this fill value. The other thing I have associated with the healthy image is this simple text. It's a Text Mesh Pro, and I've just got it showing off the value of the character's current health. That's it. So within code, we're going to have to look at those two things. Okay, so let me just grab the code and drag it over here. Here's our player health. Obviously, if I'm going to use Text Mesh Pro, I have to add the appropriate library. So I've added in the appropriate library for both the UI as well as Text Mesh Pro. So adding these both in is going to give me access to the libraries for the UI as well as Text Mesh Pro. Below that, our health controller has changed only a little bit. There's a couple of things that we had to add in here. We added a public reference to our health bar. This is the actual image that filled image that we want to have access to, and we have added in a reference to our Text Mesh Pro text, so we can change that value. We'll take a look at this death feedback in just a second and damage feedback in just 1 second. So let's go on down here and check out what we had to add. Inside of our add damage script, we now have a method of dealing damage and actually resetting our UI values. So you'll see here I've got a call to a function. This function has been set up down here to change the values of the health bar as well as the health text. Really super simple. So every time we take damage, we reset the values. You can see in my add damage, I change my current value of my current health. I then call our set UI health values, and down here I have 2 lines of code. I am changing the fill amount, and I'm setting that equal to the float. I'm calling it as a float because it's going to give me a value of less than 1. It's going to be a decimal value. The current health divided by the max health, and that's going to be set to my health value, my fill amount value. It's going to be a value between 0 and 1. So that's what we wanted to see over there, and that's exactly how we did it. Additionally, all we do is we take and we update the text of with our current health of our Text Mesh Pro value. That's it. That's how easy it is to make sure that our player is getting the information they need. Okay, so how do we go about setting up so they die? Both the death feedback as well as the individual damage feedback are located here. I've created 2 public game objects that I simply instantiate. That's how easy it is. I've created a death effects feedback, so that's the kind of blood splatter you've seen there. You can make anything you want occur. In this particular case, I just kept it really simple with some red splatter that goes up and a noise like a splotch noise. The damage feedback is exactly the same thing. In the damage feedback, what I did is I created a world UI, just like I did with a world spaced canvas, just like I did with the health bar. I created a world space canvas. I put a text in it, Text Mesh Pro again, and I update that value with the damage that we receive. So let's go down here and take a look. In the add damage, I instantiate the damage feedback right here. Inside of the damage feedback, I don't have it open, so we'll open it in 1 second. I have a set value, and all it literally does is the same thing it does down here. It's the same thing it does down here. It goes in and it sets the value of the Text Mesh Pro. That's it. So we find our damage feedback controller, we set that value. And then we add a force, and that's what makes it pop up into the world. Again, this is not something you had to do. If you wanted to have a comic book style like splat or bam or whatever, that's good feedback for your player as well. If you want to give them the precise information about this is how much damage it's doing, you could have a splat with a 10 underneath it or whatever, right? You don't have to create what I've created here. What's important is that you're giving your player the feedback they need. Okay, the very last thing we had to do is when we check if the player is dead, I've created this new make dead function. This is probably going to expand later on so that certain things stop happening. I'm not really sure yet. However, in the make dead script, all we do is we instantiate that particular death feedback and we destroy our game object, our player object. And that's it. Obviously, our player knows that their game is over because they're dead, and the proper thing to do later on, of course, is going to be have a game over screen pop up and say you've lost, etc. And we will do that later on inside of this make dead. We'll do something about that as well inside this make dead. Okay, that's it. That's how easy it is to give your players the feedback, in this particular case, that they require. Obviously, in your game, you're going to have to decide if that feedback is what's necessary. The enemy is going to work in exactly the same way. Let's back out a little bit here so you can see. In preparation for our video about enemy movement, I've created this particular enemy right here. And this enemy is just a representation of what all the enemies are going to be. We'll go over more about this enemy later on, but if we take a look at my goblin here, the goblin itself is exactly the same as our turret or exactly the same as our spike, so it has all the same stuff, just the art's changed. I've turned art on and off based on a randomization. We'll take a look at that later on. It doesn't really matter. It's exactly the same as the player. I've randomized certain things. So based on that, we had to add an enemy canvas just so we could see exactly how much damage a goblin can take before it's dead. It's going to work exactly the same way. So just let me hit play right here. And you can see, okay, that's an archer. You can see that it works in exactly the same way. So I gotta kill this thing. Before it kills me, I've made it shoot slowly. Don't shoot me. It's rude. All right, there we go. It dies in exactly the same way. Okay, nothing else has changed. Let's take a quick look at the code. So the code, let's take a look here at the enemy health system. The code's changed a little bit in exactly the same way. I've added in the TMP Pro to make sure that I had the text available. I've added in this UI, the UI library. I've added in the health bar and the health text. I've added in the damage feedback as well as the death feedback. Something else I did wanted to add in. I haven't done it for this character, but some of my students have been asking about this. I added in a loot drop as well. So we'll talk about the loot drop in just one second. This thing works exactly the same way. I come in here, I add damage, I have my set health UI. It'll set the appropriate values inside of the health, inside of the actual, on the GUI and inside the text. So it works exactly the same way as the player works. Make dead, very, very similar. So in the add damage, very, very similar. We come in, we set our values, we instantiate the feedback so we can see how much damage we're doing. We know how much damage our weapons are doing, and we set our different values. That's it. We set the values to the feedback, and that's it. If our character is dead, if this enemy is dead, we call make dead. Now, make dead is slightly different. We still have the instantiation of the death effects. You saw the blood splatter that occurred, and we still destroy the object. However, I've added in this loot drop because some of my students had an interest in it. And all we've done here is at the top, you'll see that I've set up a number of public game objects. This could be coins, it could be, I don't know, extra weapons, whatever you want. I've simply made an array called loot of different game objects. Those game objects can be instantiated. So if we come down here to the make dead, if loot drop is true, so right here we've got ourselves a Boolean loot drop. If loot drop is true, then we're going to instantiate one of those things. You could instantiate all of them if you wanted to. You could loop through and just instantiate all of them and add a force to them so they kind of come flying out of the character. If you wanted something like that, you can. In this particular case, what I've done is I've taken one, I instantiate it, and that, after the blood is gone, is going to be located in the position where the enemy was previously. So the character could collect their gold or whatever it is from destroying the enemy. That's how easy it is to do a loot drop. Obviously, you'll have to go through and build a pickup of some kind in order for your player to be able to interact with the loot. But other than that, this is how simple it is to actually make the dead character, the dead enemy, provide loot of some kind. All right, pretty simplistic. Let's get this out of the way. So that's it, guys. That's all there is to it. Next episode, we're going to take a look at getting our enemy running around. So we'll have ourselves an enemy. I've also set it up. Actually, I think the next episode, instead of running around, what I did do is I set up so that the enemy has randomized weapons. Some of my students were asking about inventory and how to change out weapons and that kind of thing. We'll talk about it next time, but that's what the next video is going to be. All right, everybody, I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, let me know down below with a thumbs up. If you didn't, that's perfectly fine. All right, everybody, I hope you guys are building something great. I'm looking forward to hearing from you and seeing what you're building. Thumbs up, thumbs down, comments down below, and if you haven't done so, please take a few seconds to subscribe. Have yourselves a wonderful day, everyone.